Hey guys, Coach Travis Smash with the Gym Aware Educational Initiative. This week we're talking about plyometrics. It's going to be a good one. I know the one before when we talked about getting faster sprints in the gym was, I thought it was unbelievable. Well, this one goes hand in hand with it. So those two together, you're going to get, man, you got all the information you could ever want to get your athletes faster. So let's dive right into it. Just before I get started, gymwear.com for all of your velocity-based training needs. You guys can use code MASH5 to get a little discount. How you decide to purchase any of their awesome products. All right, let's talk about what Verkhoshansky meant when he talked about plyometrics. He was not talking about doing 60 minutes of box jumps, and he was not talking about jump rope. He was not talking about skipping. He was talking about something that involved some type of eccentric overload, meaning there was a big time lengthening of the muscles, a big time force that was acting on the muscles that was causing a lengthening. Normally, he was talking about jumping off of a certain height of a box. Then there had to be number two, an amortization phase, meaning the change from the eccentric lengthening to the concentric shortening of the musculature and how fast one could do that. And then finally, a massive concentric output, the shortening of the muscles that involved a high rate of force development and lots of acceleration. Now, there are two terms that get thrown around a lot: drop jump and depth jump. And honestly, I thought those were interchangeable, but after doing the studies, I no longer think that. A drop jump was probably coined by Bobbert and group in 1987, and they really focused on hands on the hips the entire time, a stiff joint landing, no more knee flexion than 90 degrees, and they were looking at short contact times. That was the goal. They wanted them to jump as high as they could, but the main priority was getting off the ground as fast as possible. Now, depth jump, no doubt, come from Verkhoshansky and group, and where they cared about getting off the ground as fast as you can, but the key being the height. And so they really cared about height. They allowed the athletes to use their arms, and they wanted to use the highest box that produced the highest jump, which also meant the box that created the most impulse, the most velocity, because the longer you have to create force, the higher the velocity. And so, AKA the greatest amounts of power. So if you're into collisions, acceleration phases of sprinting, power production, and just jumping through the roof and dunking like Jordan, then depth jumps are your route. If you're looking at change of direction, a short contact time with max velocity sprinting, then drop jumps and RSI scores are going to be your thing. So yeah, here are some recommendations when it comes to any types of plyometrics. Keeping the session short, somewhere 45 to 60 minutes with a 10-minute, a really solid warm up. Make sure you get the little sweat going, the heart rate up, the internal body's temperature. Let's get it up a few degrees. You want somewhere between 50 to 75 jumps per session. It's somewhere between 100 and 150 per week. Give yourself at least 6-10 weeks to really make a good improvement in whatever it is the variable. Are you looking for height, or are you looking for contact time and height? So really, are you looking for reactive properties that lead to improvements in max velocity sprinting and change of direction, or are you looking for maximum acceleration, things that you might also find when you do things like a power clean? So, but not as good as doing his shock method, Verkhoshansky's shock method. So now it was Bosco, though, that I recommend the way he kind of did things. And my friend Dr. Brian Mann and Antonio Squilante, they both would agree, and they did a really cool thing for Stronger Experts, where they actually talked about the shock method and the ways that they apply the plyometrics and Verkhoshansky's shock method. And they will measure athletes at 30 centimeters, which is 12 inches, 45 centimeters, 18 inches, 60 centimeters, 24 inches, 75 centimeters, 30 inches, and then sometimes 90 centimeters, which is 36, and sometimes even 105 centimeters, which is 42 inches. Now, those last two are going to be, they need to be your more advanced, stronger athletes who have maybe 3 to 5 years of training under the belt. Some solid variables to consider would be taking 3 jumps at each height, making sure you rest at least 3 minutes between jumps because you want maximum output. This is not plyometrics. I mean, this is not CrossFit where you're trying to get as many jumps in 30 minutes. You're trying to get maximum output. So then you want to look at which height did you score the greatest reactive strength index, there's 2 ways to look at a reactive strength index. You either take the flight time divided by the contact time, or you take the jump height divided by contact time. Whatever it is, whichever one you choose, stick with it so you don't have any altering variables. So hold on. Sorry, a little thirsty. And then you look at which height created the greatest height. Now, once you have those two, you can have one day where you focus on the greatest, improving reactive properties, aka max velocity, and then one day where you're improving acceleration, maximum jump height. And so now you know which one you have. Now, the minute and I also recommend hands on hips like Bobbert until the reactive strength index goes down. So once you have the greatest RSI, and you I'd say the very next jump that goes down, at that point now you can start using your arms, and then you're going to find the height that gives you the greatest jump height, and then you use your arms. That is what I recommend. You can choose to keep your hands on your hips the entire time and totally eliminate any type of variable. But I'm looking for maximum height, and I really want, as I'm doing these plyometrics, to teach my athletes how to coordinate their arms with their lower body when it comes to jumping, because that's a skill, and it's a huge skill and a hard one to learn for some people. Now, once you have a peak of each, there are a few other elements to consider. One, you need a base level of strength to get into any type of plyometric training. Verkhoshansky recommended a 2 times body weight squat. I recommend like a 1.7, Now, let me be clear. I'm talking about the plyometrics we're discussing here. It doesn't mean jump training. You can do jump training. My kids jump. They're 6 years old. And so, but I'm talking about jumping off boxes and applying massive amounts of force to their joints. So then once you have that base level of strength, and I might add, personally, for the shock method in particular, which is that high box jump height, and I would recommend also a deadlift of 2.2 to 2.3 times body weight. I would recommend a power clean of at least 1.5 times body weight, along with a bench press. Not that a bench press matters. I just want them to know my athlete is overall strong and has a solid base level, and now we're rolling. But you might, and I would consider, I am totally considering this, what I'm about to tell you. Instead of the bench press, look at the push press. Because now you're looking at upper body force production that originates from the ground, which is more athletic. Now, you want to improve tendon stiffness. If you're talking about max velocity, you want to use isometrics at the specific joint angle that you'll be, that you want your tendons to be stiff at, or the joint, you want your joints to be stiff at. If you're talking about change of direction, well, it's a little different. There's a much greater amount of knee flexion and hip flexion when you're talking about change of direction, especially like, really steep. They're talking about Barry Sanders making a sharp cut to the left. Also bounding, any type of bounding, unilateral bounding. Anyway, now, if you want tendon size, thickness, isometrics from a lengthened position. So think about doing like, get the bottom of a squat in a Smith machine and push it into the Smith machine as hard as you can for 30 seconds. The 30 seconds is a direct recommendation from Keith Barr. So maybe you want to do, 3 reps at 10 seconds. Either way, get to 30 seconds. And you want your maximum voluntary, you want the at least 70% of a maximum voluntary contraction. So, you don't have to put completely as hard as you can, even though I recommend it if you want to get stronger, but like at least 70%. So, and then adding in some accentuated eccentric loading, like using weight releasers when you squat, using like dumbbells, just doing dumbbell jumps or band jumps that's going to accentuate that eccentric loading when you land. That's also going to help with tendon. That will help with not only tendon size, but it'll also improve the matrix as well, which is the tightness. And anytime you get that resistance to stretch, that tightness, that's what's going to really lead to a great amount of passive force production. And the jumping, obviously, you're going to get that this quick jumping, that is. You're going to improve the coordination of the stretch shortening cycle that is specific to high velocity sprinting. And then just strength training too when it comes to tendon size. Yeah, you do just full range of motion squats, you're going to get stronger tendons. Now, I recommend using velocity-based training with all strength training to ensure maximum compensatory acceleration. So what I mean by that is that throughout the entire range of motion, they're pushing as hard as they can. So if they're squatting, if they're deadlifting, that they are accelerating as hard as they can the entire time. So that's why sometimes using bands is a good idea, because you don't have to worry about the bar popping off the athlete's back at the top. But if it's heavy enough, then they're not going to do that anyway. So measuring improvements in the power, the rate of force development, and acceleration too. So you look at like, or any qualities of strength. So like, I want to make sure that my athlete, I would rather my athlete take a 0.5 meters per second and like improve the amount of weight they're able to move at that rate. So that is going to be much more important than their 1RM. So if they can lift 400 pounds at 0.5 and now they can do 425, well, man, that is a big time improvement at a higher rate that's more applicable to any type of sport, especially say 0.75, and just watching the improvements in load at that particular velocity, because guess what? That is where you collide at the line of scrimmage. So that's important, right? Talking about football. And so you're also going to maximize your rate coding. You're going to maximize high threshold motor unit recruitment, along with the synchronization and the coordination. So all of which are important. Also, I recommend using velocity-based training to measure the eccentric velocity, because we've already kind of talked about how important it is to tendon growth, to type 2 hypertrophy, and to tighten protein filament growth. That's the protein filament. I say it a lot. If you read my sprint article, How to Get Faster in the Gym, we talked about it as well. We talk about it a lot, and people should talk about it a lot. But the stronger you get that tightened protein filament, that's the one that anchors the myosin to the Z line. And so it resists stretch. So then it's the protein fiber the muscle fiber that's going to lead to resistance of stretch and more passive force production. Now, also using the GymAware RS or a jump mat to measure ground contact time and jump height. That's going to look at reactive properties and the improvements of set. If you're not measuring and giving your athletes something to shoot for, the odds of them improving are pretty slim, because I witness day in and day out. If I tell my athletes to improve how fast they get off the ground, along with how high, their body just tends to coordinate that movement to do exactly that. They have this thing to shoot for. They want to be under 200 around 200 milliseconds or faster, and they're trying to get higher and higher at that same rate. And when you give them something to shoot for, that's immediately given to them in feedback, they beat it. So finally, let me finish by saying some suggestions with contrast training, and here they are. If you want to improve power, acceleration, jumping, rate of force development, I recommend pairing like a squat, a pull, or pin press, or pin squats at a specific, the cool thing about pin squats is you can put it at a specific angle, joint angle. but give them a certain velocity to hit and keep it around that, because you don't want to cause too much fatigue. This is just for potentiation at this point. And then you can choose to add in the because it's like the French contrast. You go from the slowest to the fastest, and each one potentiates the other. So starting with squatting or pulls, then you go to a snatch or clean variation, which by now we've shown how important the snatch and clean can be. Since you have people like Ryan Grimslin, who weighs 165 pounds, aka 75 kilograms, moving 115 kilograms at over 4 meters per second, which is very applicable to the acceleration phase of sprinting. So no more of that argument. Then and then finally 3 being pair that with depth jumps. That's the shock method that Verkhoshansky was talking about. If you want to add in an AEL component, be my guest. 2, if you want to use contrast training to improve max velocity for speed or change of direction, then I would probably either, if I'm going to use one of the absolute strength movements, use pin squats at a higher joint angle, so it's applicable to sprinting but still moving at a higher rate. Keep that rate. I would suggest 0.7 meters per second or faster, or use a snatch or clean derivative. Pair that with the drop jump, hands on hips, looking at the RSI score, which we've already talked about, or a drop unilateral jump. I might consider, if I'm going to do like a unilateral broad jump with that, I'm going to do the first one onto the jump mat. At this point, the jump mat would be more applicable because you don't want to have to then take off the string. So you do the 30 centimeter. I would stick to wherever your athlete is producing the highest RSI score. The first one is just a unilateral vertical jump, so you can really look at improvements in RSI. And then the next rep will be the broad jump, and give them, 4 to 10 broad jumps per leg and look at how far they can go. And then you can use like a timing gate or just video it and see in a given amount of time how many steps or how many jumps they're able to get in. But whatever you're doing, measure, man. If you're not measuring, you're guessing. Maybe they look like they're working hard and you paired all these things together and it's good flow and you're proud of yourself. But measure the specific adaptations you're after. And then finally, the third component of contrast training for max speed and change of direction would be, we use the shred mill because it's so easy. It's right there, and I can coach my athletes on how to run. Or or eventually you got to do a sprint, 40-yard dash, 10-yard, 60-yard if you're a baseball player, whatever it is, something that's applicable to the sport. So, or last one, change of direction drill. If that's what you're after. Depends on what your goals are. So, snatch, clean derivative, drop jump, or drop unilateral jump into a broad jump. 3, shred mill or a sprint, or change of direction drill so I hope that makes sense. That is straight application. If you want to know the science, go read the article. It's out there. All the science is there. All the articles I used for reference are in there. If you want to deep dive into all that, be my guest. So otherwise, you can take my word for it, which I would. I never tell you guys anything that I will not back up by science. So as of now, where we're at scientifically, here's the way you should apply things. So not saying that 10 years from now things won't get better. I hope they do. But Coach Travis Mash signing off for GymAware. Go to gymaware.com. Go to gymaware.com for all of my articles. Go to the blog section, or for all of your velocity-based training needs. You can also go to mashelite.com for any of the stuff I got out there, ebooks or whatever. So thank you guys for following. I truly appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.